Hey everyone. So, welcome back to the second installment of Making Sense of the Media. To set this up, why do we have this series? Why are we experimenting with a series in this age of disinformation, information overload, and information warfare? It's never been more important to make sense of what's not just what's happening, but the media itself. So, Making Sense of the Media is a new series that helps community members practice making sense of information flows surrounding current events. Who is posting what and why, what are the ramifications, and how do we build our immunities to propaganda. One thesis that we have is that one really effective way to understand how the media works and their incentives and their tactics and to immunize yourself from a lot of the tactics is to actually practice some of those tactics. So today we have two groups of people, groups of builders that are role playing as Democratic and Republican representatives, respectively, on the topic of voting and elections. And the prompt was very open ended because that's what the real world is, right? You're not just constrained to a very small topic, right? People can create press conferences on whatever they want, and so I think so. Why don't we do first up Representative Adams and Senator Bay?
Okay, I'll begin. Senator Bay here, folks. We've been through a lot. So much has happened in the past election, and both parties have different solutions. So today, Representative Adams and I will be breaking down H.R. 1, a solution proposed by the Democrats that leaves a lot to be desired before we transition into ours. So there's a new bill around town called H.R. 1 or For the People Act, but is it really for the people? This bill proposes to force states to allow online registration, opening up the voter registration systems to massive fraud by hackers and cyber criminals. There's a good bit of stigma around Russians, but it would be remiss of us to say that the seams in our defenses are immune to exploitation. So, in the beginning of this year, David Sanger, White House and National Security Correspondent, revealed how General Paul Nakazone and other American officials responsible for cybersecurity are now consumed by what they missed for at least 9 months: a hacking aimed by Russia. Initial estimates were that Russia sent its probes only into a few dozen of the 18K government and private networks they gained access to, but now it appears Russia exploited multiple layers of the supply chain to gain access to as many as 250 networks. This is America, folks, not Russia's playground. We spend over $700 billion a year gearing up for war. We spend next to nothing defending ourselves against the real threats to our well-being and the continued existence of the United States. Cyber warfare, including disinformation and propaganda, pandemics, domestic terrorism. The past 4 years should have taught us a lesson. Our enemies can do considerable damage without firing a shot and for very little money. The scale of this intrusion exposes a key enterprise weakness that is not being adequately publicized: the steadily increasing and by now massive outsourcing of every aspect of organizational IT, of specific business processes, and of information security in general. Speaking of tampering, H.R. 1 would require states to give access to absentee ballots to third party strangers, such as major political parties and voter engagement groups. I simply do not understand how this merits security. Who knows what on earth these strangers could do with a vote they don't like? I'll leave it up to your imagination. In the name of transparency and accessibility, H.R. 1 offers solutions that compromise security for transparency. This bill isn't your friend. Now let's pass on the mic to a real friend, Representative Adams.
Thank you so much for that, Senator Bay. So now that you all know the truth about the Democrats' proposal for improving our elections, let me tell you the truth about the GOP's, because it should come as no surprise that this legislation has been insanely misrepresented by the media, to the point where Major League Baseball virtue signaled that they were woke enough to move their All-Star game out of Georgia. But I have real news for you. Georgia is not only a case study of what great legislation for increasing voter accessibility can look like, but also ensuring election integrity. And election integrity should be our nation's number one concern, a bipartisan issue. Because without safe and fair elections, what is our democracy? Sure, some Republicans have a concern one year, but it could easily be Democrats in the next. Have we forgotten about 2016? I'm sure most people haven't even read the Georgia bill. The media makes it seem like you have to be a white man, landowner, and sacrifice a child in order to vote. So let's break it down. To correct President Biden, who proved on national television that he didn't read the bill by lying to the American people and saying that Georgia's law changed Georgia's voting hours to end at 5 p.m., when in reality, the polls are open from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. And there are 17 days in which you can vote, including weekends. You can register 3 months prior to get an absentee ballot, and there are mail drop-in boxes all across the state. Okay, so now I know what you're thinking. You haven't even gotten to the racist part yet. Let's break it down. In truth, voter ID is literally about making sure people aren't lying about their identity, which, call me radical, strikes me as logical, not racist. In previous elections, the only way a person's identity was verified was through their signature. And we all know from high school permission forms that those are really easy to forge. With the Georgia bill, people send in any form of ID, driver's license, state ID number, passport, etc. Oh, and by the way, Canada requires voter ID. But millions of Americans on the left claim that they were going to move there if Trump won in 2016. Why would you want to move to a country with so much more widespread racist and bigoted voting laws? Beats me. Next, of course, is the water. Here's what the media isn't telling you. The bill says that outside groups can't give gifts at the polls and lists food and drink as an example. They make this sound somehow inhumane, but fail to mention that people can still bring their own water from home and that the county can also provide water. If you still somehow don't think this is reasonable, let's take a look at one of the most democratic states in the country, New York, that has virtually the same law, stating that outside groups cannot provide, and I quote, meat, drink, tobacco, refreshment, or provision. You see, all of this is about safe and fair elections. Nothing more, nothing less. And even New York understands that. I am tired of seeing the left misrepresent the work we are doing as a party and a country. They are against everything we stand for, even if it ultimately harms ordinary Americans like you, or they secretly support it in another form. Just remember that to them, this is about politics and power, not the American people.
Very good, you two. Yeah. Well, I guess while we're Ashley's gonna go next, but before that, why don't we just have an open forum about what we thought was effective, or like just why don't we just discuss what we saw? Um, anyone want to start?
I think you guys like embodied the Republican spirit very well, using certain keywords like reasonable, American people, misrepresentation, liberals, and left. And I feel like those kinds of buzzwords making me know that you guys are on the right, but they also were used in a very convincing kind of way. Like I say, like I haven't gotten to the racist part yet, but it's logical, not racist. Like that's like perfectly embodies the kind of argument I'd expect to see. You guys did a great job.
I think you two as a tandem worked really well. There was like the cold, rational, like here are the dangers side of it, and then there was like the passionate, kind of over the top, kind of funny, can appeal to a different kind of person side of it, and so you kind of hit on like both wings of the Republican Party. I'd say like kind of the intellectual side, like the George Will side. You might not know who George Will is. He's pretty old now, but he was like an intellectual Republican, or like the think tank side of it. And then you, like Madison, you were like the Kayleigh McEnany side of it, like the really passionate side of it that like appeals to that's like red meat for the base and like really gets them riled up. So did a good job of getting the whole spectrum.
I agree with that.
It's actually pretty funny because when we were drafting this, I think the roles were switched. I had been like consuming a lot of Fox News, so Like I was more of like the red meat sort of um, character, but then Madison kind of pulled me down. But yeah, it was strange because I had to resort to looking at a lot of Fox News, and along the way, I forgot who my audience was. And I realized that they use a lot of rhetoric, and they already are trying to like stoke up the appeals that their audiences already have. So I ended up having to use Russia as my main argument. But strangely enough, today on the front page of the New York Times, there's like this story about how Russia has hacked through systems used by the U.S. aid agency. And it's all over the news right now today, this morning. So that was a coincidence.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it was smart to do that. I think that does appeal, I think, to the median voter and even the left-leaning voter who might be concerned that there was malfeasance on Russia's part in 2016 and 2020. So I don't think that just plays to the base at all. I think that that can hit all kinds of voters.
Yeah, I feel like it's like a bipartisan concern about Russia for good reasons. I thought just this small thing, the voter ID in Canada thing, I thought that was really effective because I actually didn't. I mean, you want to drop knowledge that people don't actually know. That it's not just like it's one thing to do talking points that like or straw mans of talking points that Democrats have of Republicans, but like that was a good talking point of like the Canada voter ID because it's so hammered into us that voter ID is like racist, but then the implication is that Canada's racist, right? But we would
Where'd you
never.
find that?
Yeah.
I was reading comment sections of Fox News. Comment sections are really helpful.
Yeah.
Why,
Is it,
why
is it
don't
true?
why don't they
Or,
use that? Yeah, is that true? Why don't they use that
Yeah.
as like a main argument? Why is that just in the comment section?
I guess they don't read the comment section. I looked it up and it's true. I mean, they accept a lot of different kinds of voter ID, but they still require it all across the country.
I'm wondering why like senators and congresspeople haven't brought that up though, or even like people in Georgia who are promoting the law. I'm surprised they haven't used that argument because that is a good argument actually.
yeah. Forget which one of you said the third party handling, but I think that's a huge concern for a lot of people, but especially Republican voters. That's why they do like 1,000 audits of the same election over and over again. So yeah, that's good. Ashley, I know that you didn't prep like a script, but it's okay, no pressure. We're figuring this whole format out. But feel free to go whenever. Again, don't feel too much pressure about this.
Um, cool. Yeah, I do not have a script, so kind of just gonna talk about some of the things I was looking at. Um, so I think one of the fundamental rights that we need to preserve in a democracy is the right for every American to vote, right? And I think the biggest problem in our country is that the rules make it too difficult for eligible Americans who want to vote to cast a ballot. And we saw that in the 2020 election, which I think underscores a need for comprehensive structural democracy reform because Americans across the country were forced to, overcome rampant voter suppression, gerrymandering, and this insane amount of special interest dark money just to exercise their vote and their voice in our democracy. Um, and I think that's why one of the biggest things we need to do is expand access to elections through things like early voting and mail-in ballots. Um, Automatically registering Americans who are eligible to vote to do so really expands access to voting, especially for people in communities who have faced institutional barriers to voting. I know, like last year, there were a series of voting measures passed that made it easier for people to vote by mail and to register to vote and vote early because of COVID-19. And because of that, we saw a record number of both Democrats and Republicans who voted in the 2020 elections. But now, GOP controlled state legislatures are trying to roll back those election changes and impose barriers that make it harder to vote. And, you might be asking, well, why are they doing that? Well, part of it is fueled by just Republicans who believe, all of what Trump is saying about the 2020 elections and kind of that big lie around elections being marred by widespread voter fraud, which is completely unsupported. Like, election fraud is extremely rare in the US, according to researchers, and multiple courts at both the state and federal levels have, kind of rejected Trump's claim last year. I think what is happening is that when parties lose in national elections, they kind of think about where they went wrong, and Republicans are choosing to double down on restricting voting access. Which is crazy because in a democracy, when you lose an election, you should try to win over the people who didn't vote for you, not prevent them from voting. I just think it's what Republicans are doing is just incredibly undemocratic, and this is really voter suppression at its core, and that just goes against everything that America stands for.
Cool. Thanks, Ashley. All right, let's talk about feedback.
I heard her using good buzzwords like undemocratic, voter suppression, what America stands for. I think, how you all mentioned that we use buzzwords for Republicans, I think that Ashley was able to do the same for Democrats in a really effective way.
Yeah, first of all, it's really hard to do that with little to no prep. But I think it's a good exercise sometimes. You can surprise yourself at how much you've internalized and how you can do these things on the fly sometimes, even when you think you're not ready. And it's a good way to get comfortable speaking kind of impromptu about these things. So kudos for doing that. And I think you were hitting on something towards the end that I think more Democrats could do is kind of like this. It almost mimics the Republican side, is almost positioning it as like a sore loser kind of angle here. Like, this is all like you lost. Like, hey, we lost in 2016 and Hillary conceded, and like we didn't try to change any voting laws. Like, we just went back and organized and got to the ballot box. Like, hey, you lost in 2020. Like, why are you sore losers and trying to change the rules now? Like, now you're trying to change the rules of the game. And I think that argument holds a lot of sway with a lot of regular Americans, and it is not being used enough. And I think you're really starting to hit on that towards the end.
I totally agree. Like, when you said we try to win over new voters, not trying to suppress voters. Yeah, that was impactful.
Jacob, do you have anything?
I don't know how impromptu that was, but that was like a really solid take on an issue that, for example, your opponents were incredibly well prepared for. And I almost feel like, when you see like any kind of Fox talk show or even like a CNN talk show, they'll always have like a representative of the other side. They'll be like, pretty unprepared. They'll get like hammered by like the person that's like conducting the dialogue, but also like the people in the dialogue. And so I feel like, I wonder what would happen if we had like these theoretical situation where Senator Bay, Representative Adams were against you, Ashley.
Yeah.
I think you'd have actually held your ground.
I mean, we could also do the simulation right now, but let's finish this round of feedback, and then if you're up for it, and again, nope, like don't worry about the performance that much. Let's just see what happens. But
yeah, I mean, like, I guess just to Jacob's point, like, I think like when it comes to interviews, it's really less about the people actually answering the questions, right? It's more about the interviewer. Like, the moderator controls the conversation. Like, as the person asking the questions, I can ask them in a way to get people to respond in like in a certain way. And so I think that's something I learned about journalists is that like people like are literally putting themselves like just you they have no control over where the conversation happens. And so I think when you end up like just putting people kind of like in a room, like people from both sides in a room with people asking them like questions, people just default to whatever like narratives that their like party is already saying. And so it like doesn't even and so I guess like it's just not even a hard conversation to navigate anymore because you can already predict what people are going to say and you don't have any control over like where the conversation goes anyway. So yeah.
All right, so just some feedback on my end. Examples of voter suppression would be really helpful. Um, the mentioning the big lie was good. I guess it depends on. Yeah, I think it's good. We're just in such a polarized time that it can be very triggering for some people. But one thing that I was like noticing as you were saying like blah 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 has been debunked according to researchers, and I was thinking like do a lot of people that are really persuasive like lean on that, or do they just say it's been debunked? Like it's a totally baseless theory, right? You're not gonna say like it's a totally baseless theory according to this journal and this journal, this journal, this journal, right? There's something like nuanced about not feeling like you have to like it's just so obvious that something is ridiculous. Um, it's like leaning on.
I think it depends on the audience.
Yeah,
That
no,
depends on the audience, right?
for sure, right. And so then my next piece of feedback is who is the audience, right? Is it the people that need to be convinced? Sorry, are the people that need to be convinced? Is it like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, or is it Republican voters and senators? Because if it's those, let's say it's like Republican voters and senators and Congress people, you would use less like demonizing language, and you'd be like more like the carrot, like hey, like this is going to be good for everyone, and you would approach this whole press conference a bit differently, versus like, is your point to win popularity in the Democratic Party? I think that's probably more where this press conference leaned more to. I don't know if you would disagree with that, agree or disagree with that. Ashley, what do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't even thinking about that. But yeah, I think yeah, it was definitely more kind of just like virtue signaling and like kind of more broadly. Um, yeah, because I guess because if you were talking to Republicans or someone who was more moderate, you would um try to frame yourself as like morally or like ethically right, which and less so like attacking like the other side and more so like just like your own position like on the higher ground. And I don't really think I did a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. I don't even know. I think that's it's like a good problem to figure out. Like, how do you? What would the appeal be to? Like, HR1 makes it easier for rural voters to vote, or I don't know, like or and like military, like veterans, and I don't know. That's a good question.
It makes me like question, like, when I am watching the news and there is some kind of debate going on between different sides of an issue, like I wonder how those people do prepare. Maybe, JT and Madison, sorry, have like thoughts about that. But like, when you've been called by some news agency to say, would you like to be on our panel talking about this issue? Do you go into it like, I'm going to show them that I'm right, that we are the best, or you like, I'm going to try to convince them that there is some virtue to this new bill and it needs to be passed? I think a lot of what I see, at least maybe in the middle of the day, is like more combatives between either side. And I wonder, like, what kind of arena could you create that would be a bit more friendly between the two sides? What would it take?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know what I mean, the first question is how movable are any of the people that need to be persuaded? Like, I would guess it's very, very little, right? Like, I don't know, Nick, what do you think? Like, how, like, for the less like ordinary voters, but more like, the 10 senators and like the X number of House representatives that need to be swayed. Like, how many of those people are not going to just follow the orders of Kevin McCarthy or McConnell? Right. I mean, I'm not saying you would know the answer to that, but I'm just curious your thoughts.
Well, yeah, on this, the public's kind of already spoken. All the polling shows that HR1 is very popular. The way you frame the question matters, but it can be almost like 70%, which is very rare. So that's not the issue, right? It's obviously convincing 10 Republicans to get on board, or convincing Manchin and Sinema to kill the filibuster to pass it. And so this is an awesome exercise, but like the audience really would just be those 10 Republicans and those 2 Democrats, I think, at this point.
I also think to change the way that people act in interviews, you have to change the way that people gain political points. So right now, the way that a Republican becomes popular and is rewarded within the Republican Party is if they go on Fox News, say something clever, appeal to people, and people aren't going to go into interviews and act civil if it's not rewarded or if it's not like what makes them popular. So I think it comes to like, that's not like a root problem. It like goes down to like I guess like a more root problem of like partisanship and just like how the political parties are structured.
So this exercise was really great, and I think what it taught me was that it's probably only so useful for us to be role playing Democrats and Republicans. I think what would be cool is if, like, how could you role play Jeff Bezos in an antitrust hearing? How would you role play ExxonMobil, right? Or like Chevron and like basically rigging the legal system to get this one guy, the activist, in house arrest for 2 years, right? I think that's a hard problem, and I think everyone should be picking. I mean, this doesn't always have to be the case, but I think people should challenge themselves to pick people that they don't necessarily like, entities that they don't necessarily aren't just like super fans of, because you're gonna think really hard to make them look good. What do you think about that idea of just like getting away from direct partisan politics and more like entities that, I mean, other entities that are really powerful and relevant to our system?
I think it sounds good.
Awesome. Why don't we at the end of every one of these sessions, let's pick like a scenario. Let's pick like what the next simulation is going to be. So, what do we think about that? Anyone have ideas?
Do you want it to be something business related or tech related?
Could be anything that could be anything.
What I like about like the Jeff Bezos example is like it's not just right or left. It's also like a vertical element to it, like like a lot of money, not a lot of money. Like, what's your target audience and who is being affected by this thing? So I'm looking for something real quick.
Jacob is Bezos.
I think that's a good one. Bezos. And then we could have
Elizabeth Warren on the other side.
yeah. We could have basically it doesn't have to, yeah, it doesn't have to be just like Warren. It could be like anyone that just someone that has like a great way to get that's committed to creating an argument that wins the American public, basically, against Bezos.
Bernie. Can I play Bernie?
Do you actually want to?
No.
Okay.
This is not for me to do. But
Okay.
somebody can play Bernie.
Does anyone want to play the like grilling side? And I think it might be cool for us to do like each side has opening statements, and then like the regulator person is like asking questions for like a few minutes.
I really enjoyed working with Madison, so I think that leaving the option to work in teams of two for more collaboration would also be fun for the future.
Cool. Jacob, do you want to be Jeff?
What time is this going to be next week?
Oh, so it's whenever works for us. It could be the same time.
All right, yeah, I'll be Jeff, but I do want
Partner.
somebody on my side,
Yeah.
partner. Yeah.
Cool. I'll advertise that in the channel, and then yeah, let's definitely do like a 2-on-2 type deal.
And we'll also like create some kind of a formal structure for it, where like there will be like either side clashing against each other, moderated but more directly, so that there's interaction between the two.
Yeah. Cool. Any kind of final thoughts before we wrap up?
I've been having trouble with the app, but I'm in the process of making a pair deck for a kind of more of like a lesson, kind of like one of Nick's bonfires or Nick's new knowledges about the media. And so I was wondering, we could have this little group, and should we also like make it a more open, like somebody sent a general thread kind of an activity as well? So more the fellowship is kind of wrapping up right now, but I feel like it could be like a good practice we could all have with the entire.
Sorry, what are you creating?
It's almost like not a curriculum, but like an activity. For example, there's a couple of questions. One of them is like, from which source do you receive most of your news?
Are you?
From which news companies you consume? It's like the main thing is like, let's play a game. Like all news, your new like news company. Like what format do you use? Is it digital? Is it print? Is it on social media? What kind of topics do you cover? But then also like, what is your source of revenue? I feel like it could put people into a new perspective about how media companies think and how that influences what actually gets out there.
I mean, so you have two options. You could do an unmaster class, which Madison can help you plan when you do that. But you could also just like, you could also maybe if we just work together on organizing it, you could do this as like one of the installments of this series. And I can just like let you lead that.
Either one would work. I just need to develop it a bit more so we can see which would it fit better as. And also, I do want to see those slides templates that you guys use, because mine aren't going to be as pretty unless I can find some kind of good source.
Slidesgo.com.
Okay, cool. All right, I will advertise this scenario in the channel and get you a partner. And then we'll find you a partner, Jacob. But great stuff. Thanks for continuing to be co-experimenters on this. I think this will be really cool once it's really developed.
Thanks for putting it together.
All right. Thanks for coming, Nick, and everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
for being here, guys.